May the 8th, 2022. Everybody's doing good on this Sunday. I'm your host tonight, Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclear proctologist.org. You can feel free to call anytime, certainly, but during a live show at 709-589-4406. Welcome to hell, aka the nuclear industry. We have a big poll for everybody tonight, big shot poll. If we want to save the whales and all other species worldwide, should we ban all nuclear power plants? And we have a resounding yes. That's the correct answer. I need a couple of shakedown shows to get back into this. You know, over 10 years now of doing this particular type of show and all kinds of research expeditions and everything else. I've never missed a day because of sickness until last week. That was the first time. I think that's a pretty good record, if there's such a thing in this craziness that we're at. Welcome, everybody. Your number one enemy is the nuclear industry, and the International Atomic Energy is at the head of that list. They are the furthest things from what they claim they are. It's an unequivocal betrayal. And these people should be ashamed of themselves, and their families should be sent to the multiple nuclear meltdowns that these creatures have covered up. This industry goes way back. I'll play a clip from the Castle nuclear testing back in the 50s.
The whole picture of fallout contamination becomes of increasing importance with high-yield weapons. In one program, drone ships were sent into fallout areas to evaluate the worth of a washdown system for ship decontamination. We found we could measure fallout even in large ocean areas by making aerial surveys using extremely sensitive radiation detection equipment and with surface craft such as tugs and destroyers. As a result of these measurements, we were able to document for the first time fallout data from high-yield detonations. It is now known that fallout from the larger Castle shots blanketed areas of more than 5,000 square miles with radioactive material that would have been lethal to unprotected personnel. This one result gives a new insight into a method for using high-yield weapons in both strategic and tactical situations.
So they're talking about 5,000 square miles where it's a lethal dose. This is in the 50s, for goodness sakes. They were aware of radioactive fallout. And this is from nuclear weapons, not... So imagine a nuclear weapon, 10, 15, 20 pounds, versus a nuclear meltdown of thousands of tons. This was in Koriyama, by the way, and we cover that city a lot because people still live there. And my last show, I was showing you how the schools use bottles of water in crates stacked outside the classrooms and inside the classrooms to help shield the children from, radiation exposure. Just defies any kind of logic whatsoever that they live there and that they don't move the children somewhere else. And that in that community, 7 people had died by September 2012 on a single shopping street. That's 35 miles away from a nuclear meltdowns. There was a comment, and I see this a lot, and this person, they mentioned Helen Caldicott. And so I get this all the time where they'll mention Helen Caldicott, Ernie Gunnarsson, Christopher Busby. They get sucked into that. It's not their fault. And they get sucked into these people that are very soft-spoken, very deceptive people. And I'll explain what I mean by that. This is actually what Reactor 4 looks like. Over there is what it doesn't look like. Helen Caldicott has done hundreds of radio interviews where she asserted that the building didn't look like this. I'll play the clip because it's extraordinary, really.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
Try making that one up on your own. So I'd be very careful and trust in Helen Caldicott. They also bring up Libby Levy, nuclear hot seat. People get sucked into these talk shows, who attacked me viciously when I was arrested and prosecuted after coming ashore from multiple research expeditions. She ignored the expeditions. All the species were gone. She ignored all that and then attacked me. And Christopher Busby, Dr. Busby, is how he... Let me explain Busby for you, because I got little clips of Busby. I couldn't find the Libby clips for some reason. I'll get him eventually.
Having said all this stuff,
Now, he's going to talk about radioactive fallout was found in America, and he said there was no way it can make it to America. It's too far away.
I know it sounds a bit waffly, but I mean, I would like to wait and see somebody actually measure the gamma radiation spectrum of whatever it is that's supposed to be coming in and causing the irradiation of America, because it's very hard to imagine how there could be a 5-fold increase in natural background radiation from the sort of material that's coming from Fukushima. It's just too far away. But having said...
Now, he said natural background radiation. That wasn't an accident, because man-made is not natural, right? So it's not an accident that he framed the narrative that way. But the models clearly showed that it could reach right around the entire planet. That model is only 20 days. Imagine after 10 or 15 more days. Here's another extraction from the same interview where he does the same thing.
I mean, I had the same problem with somebody in Brazil who was finding enormously high levels of radioactivity in the water, and he was assuming it was coming on the jet stream from Fukushima, which is impossible because it's just too far.
Now, anthropogenic pollution from industries in Asia adds to the pollution indexes in the United States and other countries. But here's a model from France of the radioactive fallout. This model is just 16 days. Sums up to 16 days. It'll stop at 16 days. So after 16 days, that's the Pacific over there, the Atlantic right here. That's Europe, for goodness sakes. The whole planet is covered in 16 days in radioactive fallout. But Christopher Busby says he finds it impossible to believe that they found high radiation levels, or any radiation in Brazil, because it's too far away. But he also does another one where he, in order to enforce the deception.
And it turned out the thing had a half-life. You know, he got some tissues and measured the half-life, put it in a plastic bag and so on. and it turned out to be quite a short half-life, so it was obviously radon. It couldn't have come from Fukushima, and I'm
He got some tissue and measured it was radon. It's the most ludicrous assertion imaginable. But, like, because he has all kinds of credentials, he was a government lapdog for many years, so it seems like he should be well informed. This was another plutonium dispersal model based upon TEPCO's release numbers. You can see plutonium covering the planet. Look, you know, there's one thing I'm a firm believer in, is that you don't smear somebody unless you can back it up with documentation, right? You know, because people could, you go to universities, you get all kinds of expenses through universities and struggle, and they get their degree and they got to go find a job and everything else. So, you know, I don't have a right to smear somebody on a conjecture and an opinion. And that's why I go through a lot of work. I won't do it. I will not do it unless I get the documentation. So when I call someone a scumbag, it's because they're an actual scumbag. But I'll take it to a step further where I'll actually, and it's not easy to do what I'm doing, and that's why I don't see many people doing it, because it's just disgusting amount of work. But I'm a firm believer in not smearing somebody without the documentation to back up those assertions. And you would hope that they wouldn't do it to you without the documentation, like Libby Levy from Nuclear Hot Seat had done to me. She had looked at me at all, she would have realized I was actually a good person and that I had the moral high grounds, and that I don't smear people without the documentations. The U.S. should show it can win a nuclear war, Wall Street Journal. It's absurdness. The U.S. should show it. And how's it supposed to do that again? According to them, it needs to detonate a few bombs to show them who's the boss around here. This, like, as I showed you earlier, the Americans already showed they can win a nuclear war. And there is no winner in a nuclear war on top of that, right? So how can you show that you can win a nuclear war when there's no winner? Unless the U.S. is prepared to win a nuclear war, risk losing one, says Robert C. O'Brien, a former White House National Security Advisor. So once a scumbag, always a scumbag, you know? Nuclear waste sorting, recycling. Recycling. That's a word you don't want to hear with nuclear. It's recycling. Tin cans and pop bottles, forks and knives and children's toys. Nuclear waste sorting and recycling facility under construction in Canada. Canada's the last country now. The nuclear industry, within 93 days, had removed all restrictions from Japan's, the entire country. They're like, ship it all in, because for 10 years, Japan couldn't really ship it to many countries. Certainly the first 4, 5, 6 years. Canada was like, ship it in here, we'll poison everything. So now you see diseases and illnesses and cancers just skyrocketed, obesity skyrocketing throughout the country because Japan now has free rein to poison us. It's horrifying what they got done. Construction's underway in a new facility in Ontario for low and intermediate. Now, you can't trust a single word the industry says. Not a single word. You got to scrutinize it and look for documentation to prove it. There's no such thing as low and intermediate unless you compare it to the high level. But it's all deadly, see? So even low and intermediate is still deadly stuff. So it's no good to call it low. It's a very deceptive way of framing it. And intermediate low-level nuclear waste will be sorted and shifted to see if the current 100,000 cubic meters, so think about 100,000 one-ton pickup trucks. When you think of these cubic meters, it's basically 2,200 pounds or more, can be reduced in size and volume. And we've been covering this for years, how this is one of the games where Japan picked up around 30 to 60 million one-ton bags. They're hoping to reduce it down to 1%. And they're doing that by burning it in incinerators is one of the ways. These are most likely planning to do the same thing. We can sort about 6,000 cubic meters a year of nuclear waste. A year. Oh, I got that broken down in the numbers for you. So over the next decade, we can really get that volume down, maybe even by half, with Ontario, says Fred Kuntz, with Ontario Power Generation. 6,000 cubic meters a year, which is 16 cubic meters a day, which is 16 tons a day, which is 36,000 pounds of nuclear waste a day. And I did have it broken down in the minutes, but I must have not screen captured, I guess. Okay, so 36,000, that means you're doing well over 1,000 pounds an hour of nuclear waste. Sorting 36,000 pounds of nuclear waste a day. This is absurdness to suggest that's true. So Fred, with Ontario Power Generation, there's nothing they won't do to deceive the population, can be shrunk through a combination of compaction, and incineration. This is what I mean. Whenever somebody in the nuclear industry says, well, we should just incinerate it, they're incinerating dirty bombs. Somebody should take them to the incinerator and accidentally trip them. So we can compact and incinerate these creatures. So they're talking about workers' garments and gloves. So those workers should be getting compensation because they were poisoned, for starters. Because if your gloves are radioactive, you're radioactive. Because of the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutrons, right? Really got 36,000 pounds a day of gloves and garments. The sorting happens at the new NEW, Western Clean Energy Sorting Recycling Facility, once it's operational by early 2023. So this is outrageous. They're talking about burning dirty bombs here in Canada. Will be all the more important if plans to build small modular nuclear reactors across Canada. I mean, by 2026, there's going to be another 4,800 gigawatts of new renewable energy online. That's more than all current fossil fuel worldwide and nuclear power plants worldwide combined. So why would you walk back on something like that and continue to use dirty nuclear? Because the industry it's broken. There is nothing and nobody reliable in the entire nuclear industry. You can't name me a single person in the nuclear industry that you trust. They don't exist. There's no one. Well, he or she's a pretty good person, Dana. You actually can't do that. When it comes to she, there's Kathleen Higley and Geraldine in the United States. 100% monster, Kathleen Higley, and Geraldine Thomas from the United Kingdom. Unequivocal monsters. These are 100% monsters. these people 100% should be arrested and tried for crimes against humanity across Canada. Can sort the low-level materials, really put the truth into nuclear as clean energy. Put the truth into nuclear by burning their legacy of dirty bombs and releasing that into the environment, says Ontario Power Fred Kuntz. Ontario low and intermediate level nuclear waste, which is terrorist weapons, you incinerate it, that's a terrorist tactic. See? And terrorists that's what nuclear industry, the people in the nuclear industry actually are. These are terrorists. It's currently stored above ground, near ground buildings, which is really interesting because you haven't tried to come up with a repository anywhere on the planet. Containers at the Bruce Nuclear Power nuclear site. You talk about crimes against humanity, my goodness. You know what Bruce Nuclear Power done last year, right? There was it was $5 billion up for grabs for pumped hydro storage. And Bruce Power nuclear plant jacked that so that the renewable industry wouldn't be able to move into the next stage and move the country forward. And it's going to have pumped hydro for nuclear. The ultimate betrayal. The ultimate ingredient too, because they got $13 billion after Fukushima melted down to rebuild their disease factories known as nuclear power plants. In a separate project, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is the people that created the waste in the first place, 22 years ago got $28 billion to build a repository. They expect to have one in about another 22 years or something like that. And then it'll take them about 40 years to dig it, because all they can come up with is a hole in the ground, because there is no one there with initiative in the whole industry. It'll be 40 years before they actually can get a hole in the ground from the time they got $28 billion. Which means that the waste is hemorrhaging, splitting the atoms. That's released into the communities. This is why you've seen so much heart problems in liver and lung and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, Down syndrome. To build an underground facility to bury Canada's lethal now their high-level nuclear waste is splitting the atom into the environment. Everything is vented. These are kill machines. These are disease factors we're talking about. There is no future for any species on the planet with this industry. They're wiping us out as we speak. And then they're shipping food in from Japan with no mitigation, no checks and balances after 93 days, when 55 countries banned the food for a decade. Canada said, no, let's poison everybody in Canada. That way there's no resistance to the nuclear industry here. We should all be ashamed of ourselves for not speaking out sooner. I am anyway. I mean, but they hit it, but it doesn't matter. We should have been aware of it. The media has miserably failed us and betrayed us. The sorting and recycling facilities for Ontario low and intermediate, which is still terrorist weapons, will be built by years in, and operations should be early 2023, Fred Kuntz said. Site of the Western Clean Energy Sorting and Recycling Facility near Ontario. They're just starting to build it, apparently. The definition of evil, folks, right there. South Korea enters the race for Poland's $40 billion nuclear program. This is what I mean. This is a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because the last president of South Korea is going to phase out nuclear. So they jacked him, got rid of him, put in a pro-nuclear scumbag, and now it's let's poison everybody. despite the fact that the International Energy Agency had already said we'll have 4,800 new gigawatts online by 2026, which, by the way, that's equal to 5,500 nuclear power plants. Why bother? Well, Poland is part of NATO. It's right over by Ukraine, and it's a enemy of Russia. So let's put a nuclear wasteland close to Russia. And then these crazies, you see them when they get together, these exorbitant dinners. If you sold the jewelry and the clothing and the money that went into that one meeting there, you could probably save 29,000 children today. World Nuclear News, which is a lobbying group. This is just a nuclear lobbyist group. Why would you quote someone like that? All they're going to do is, everything is pro-nuclear. They're not going to be an independent. Signed at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. And Warsaw, of course, is right alongside of Ukraine. It's right on the border. World Nuclear News, first off, they never put their names on their so-called story, which is really just propaganda. And they're not going to be independent because they're pro-nuclear lobbyists. So it's going to be 100%. How can we have a future with just this system? How does that work? Well, we can't. How can the species survive? Well, they can't. So we got a poll tonight. If we want to save the whales and all other species, should we ban all nuclear power plants? And we have a resounding 97% says yes. Somebody, I guess, accidentally voted no. And that's autism. It's not that autism is a bad thing. It is, though, when it's weaponized against us, and that's what you're looking at right there. Right? You can tell that he's got autism. He's the founder of Generation Atomics, and he goes around Team Nuclear. With the help of the U.S. Department of Energy, sponsor programs called Gateway to Accelerate Innovation in Nuclear, also known as GAIN. It's supporting this demented autism, pro-nuclear, weaponized imbecile, I think is the best way to put it. He founded it in 2016. So, not willing to acknowledge the heartbreak and genocide of Fukushima. Pretend that doesn't exist and promote nuclear. That's the definition of a murderer. Because wherever you put nuclear, it hemorrhages, is still splitting the atom into the environment. And the numbers we're talking about daily is hundreds of trillions of atoms. And that's just a fraction of what's really coming out of there, by the way. Being released into the environment to go around looking for hosts to poison or mutate or destroy or sterilize, and ultimately poison the entire biosphere and all species and everything with replicating cells. More importantly, they become eligible for the Building Bridges program, of which the World Nuclear Association, which is a lobbying group, is a partner to subsidize the cost of the conference registration for approved events. So this autism that's been weaponized against us, Myers, these nuclear lobbying groups recognize him, right, as a useful tool, and then he's used as a weapon then to destroy humanity, and particularly the women and the children, which are the most vulnerable. We should always remember we have to protect the women and children of our planet, and because they're the most vulnerable, and the industry is targeting them of all species. The Energy Wealth Project, energywealthproject.com. Still underrepresented in Europe, South America, Australia. Endorsing this effort and promoting it to workers that are inclined to advocate in this way would help grow our regions of atomic ambassadors. Atomic ambassadors. So you see an industry that perpetuates evilness, that its whole legacy, right, is on the back of evil. It can only exist as long as you're evil. If you're a good person, you don't fit in. And so you automatically feel that and you're rejected anyway because you become a threat to the industry. They're very careful about stuff like that. And we are also asking organizations where possible to allow employees to attend on company time. So they want the nuclear industries to pay for these so-called atomic ambassadors to go out. And this is it's a death cult, true death cult. And what they're talking about is they need to grow the death cult always. So this is what they're talking about. It is for the good of the death cult, aka sector. Solar beat nuclear in many potential settlement sites on Mars. Because the nuclear industry, really it's something how the nuclear industry has infiltrated almost every facet of our lives now. And it hasn't done it subtly, it's just done it because there's no one paying attention per se, right? There's no opposition in the mainstream to it because they bought all the mainstream in increments over the years and now weaponize that against the population of the planet and the species. A new study concludes the solar power system would weigh less than a nuclear system and would be sufficient to power a colony at sites all over nearly half the surface of Mars. Well, first, why haven't they put a colony on the moon? Is that a stupid question? You know, America went to the moon, so why didn't anybody else go to the moon? Has anybody ever thought about that question? You got to appreciate that they're not stupid. They're extremely evil. And they don't like tipping their hands, but sometimes, like if you can read between the lines in the nuclear industry, you'll see them tipping their hands all the time. This is what we do here. We show that quite clearly that this industry is not even their own friend. They're the enemy of everybody and all species. The high efficiencies, lightweight, and flexibility of the latest solar cell technology. Well, if it's true for the moon, it's true for Earth. Yeah? Atomic Energy Agency, danger signs at occupied nuclear site in Ukraine. Really? Well, like if you want to disable a nuclear power plant cause a meltdown, you got to remember a couple of things. First off, it usually only got about 8 to 10 hours of diesel fuel on these sites for their backup generators. If you cut the external supply to these sites, they automatically have to go fire up their generators. Now, their generators are massive machines. They're incredibly big. And it usually takes around 24 hours of prep work to start up one of these things. And that NRC had found over half of America's generators won't start. And so they're trying to This is why. By the way, all nuclear power plants need 2 external power supplies to run. The environmental impacts of nuclear power. On the one hand, it can provide energy at a scale without burning fossil fuel. Again, it can't, because it needs 2 fossil coal, oil, or gas plants dedicated to it 24 hours a day and long after it's shut down in order to run. So to say that it doesn't burn fossil fuel, this is ludicrous assertions. But that's what they do. They just say it. They can't back it up. And they can't tell you the truth. All they can do is repeat the same lies over and over. But they make slip-ups, and we like to catch that and shove it down their throat. Without burning fossil fuel, again, they can't exist without external power supplies. It's usually coal plants because they're the cheapest. They claim there's 439 civilian, not counting universities, not counting militaries, not counting Los Alamos or the laboratories, not counting Russia's secret and China's secret and Israel and Pakistan and India's secret, blah, 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 blah. Reactors worldwide with 56 under construction and 96 in the pipeline as of March 2022. But once again, you're going backwards, because by 2026, there's going to be 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewables actually online. Last year was 333 nuclear power plants came online in a 12-month period of renewable energy, 291 gigawatts. It's asinine to continue to build these death machines, these disease factories. Neutrons collide with uranium plutonium atoms, nuclide to continue the fission reaction, which never stops. You can't ever stop that reaction. And so when you take it out of the reactor and put it in the pools because it's extremely hot, and what that hot means is splitting atoms at the same rate to power 1 million homes, even though it's no longer in a containment. So those atoms now are released into the environment because you can't contain that. And every day there's another 1 million atoms worth of energy released into the environment. Next day another 1 million. So think about if you had a snowstorm every day and the snow never melted. Because that's what nuclear is, except it's not snow, it's invisible atoms. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up. But it's still flowing out and contributing and adding and multiplying from 439 power sites each year. It's a death sentence for everything with replicating cells on the entire planet. Neutron hit uranium-235 plutonium atom, nucleized, split, and this never stops. Despite the fact that it's now out of the containment vessels, it's still going to do that. So instead of producing energy, now it's just released into the environment, evaporated about 120,000 liters out of each pool each day, and each liter is saturated. And, after Fukushima, saturation of just iodine-129 isotopes was over 220 million of those atoms per liter in Canada. That was a Canadian study out of Ottawa. But that was also applicable throughout the United States. Certainly, it can't be just there. It has to be everywhere. It's just not going to be. Because as I showed you, the plume covers the whole planet in about 16 days. Spent fuel is moved to a spent fuel pool to cool it down. No, see, this is not a physical hotness. This is not like you take a piece of steel and put it in a fire. You get a red hot. And then it's so hot, you put it in water, and now it just cools down, becomes steel, right? Now you can pick it up a few minutes later, it's innocuous and benign. But that's not what happens here. It has to stay in the water because the shell is exposed to air, it will catch fire. The zirconium cladding will actually catch fire. And that will cause now the fuel pellets underneath it to also catch fire. And that's called a nuclear meltdown. So that it's not to cool it down, it's to stop it from detonating, to stop it from exploding. But it's still splitting the atom. So if you were to capture those atoms, which is known as a breeder reactor, then you can make fuel. Because it's a physical thing. It's creating these atoms. It's a perpetual disease factory on top of that. Because all of this, no humans, no animals has the immune system to any of this stuff. It's a definition of stupid to have it on your planet. It's a definition of stupid. And enclose any ionizing radiation. Right? That's an absolute lie. Now, if you're just talking about gamma shines and X-rays and neutrons, it's still a lie. But it's releasing the atoms. This is why they have those tall, skinny stacks to vent the fuel pools off-site. This is why, and like the whole thing about that is just because like I don't always want to walk you down the path, even though because of time constraints and stuff like that. And this is rapeseed, used for rapeseed oil, for instance. This is nuclear power plants. Radioactive fallout is constantly being sucked up by the farms. They don't surround nuclear power plants with farm because it looks pretty. They do it to catch the atoms. And guess who eats the food? It's not going to be them. I'll give you a hint anyway. It's going to be you. And then you get sick and die. Hang on, did I? And enclose any ionized. It's a total deception, that statement there. It's a completely misdirection. Today there's only 390 gigawatts of nuclear power in operation worldwide. 390 gigawatts. In 2021, there was a new 290 gigawatts, which is 100 gigawatts shy of total nuclear, of new renewables in a 12-month period, mostly wind and solar, that beat in the previous year on top of that. And that the international energy agencies expect renewable energy generating capacities to overtake fossil fuel and nuclear energy combined by 2026. That globally renewable electricity capacity is forecast to increase by 60% between 2020 and 2026, reach more than 4,800 gigawatts. It's equivalent to the current global power capacity of fossil fuel and nuclear combined, which is equal to 5,500 nuclear power plants coming online in just the next 4 years of renewables. Nuclear can't compete with that. And if you married that up, of course, with compressed air storage, which is where you dig in big mine shafts and tunnels and compressing low compressed air down there at about 120 psi, and pumped hydro for storage instead of stupid, idiotic batteries, right? Because that's the distraction. Oh, well, we don't have battery capacity for storage, so sad, too bad, solar and wind. But if you use compressed air storage, which is a proven technology, or pumped hydro, because you can recirculate pumped hydro just for peak power, right? Just for that 6 to 8 hour window of peak energy you need each day. Nuclear wouldn't exist if you actually applied it properly. Renewables, nuclear would lose hands down because solar and wind is so cheap, and the prices are just diving in because technology is accelerated. Even though it's being held back, it still smashes every facet of the nuclear. Again, when you see this word, this is a good one here, by the way. Nuclear power could help Europe cut its Russia's ties, but in about 15 years. So it's stupid, because renewables have already demonstrated that it's time, right? The only thing stopping the renewable wave is nuclear industry has a stranglehold on everything and is destroying. It'll take down, it's what they call the drowning man syndrome, where it'll take down everything that tries to help it. It'll just drown everybody around it till the end, till there's nobody left. That's what nuclear is up to. A nuclear reactor under construction in Flamanville, France in 2016, which was then a decade behind schedule. It was supposed to be online in 2006. So if we'd done the same thing today, there'd be 11,000 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energies online in that same period. So what's the point of nuclear? And then on top of it is just a disease factory, because it's perpetually releasing atomic elements that are extremely dangerous to all replicating cells. Hi everybody. Yeah, we got 2 people voted no on the poll, which is probably a mistake, or just for the nuclear industry. If we want to save the whales and all other species, should we ban all nuclear power plants? Well, the right answer is obviously yes. I mean, that's it's indisputable. It's incontestable. It's unassailable. Yes. On the windswept coast of Flamanville, which is France, is building the last couple of reactors, are just it's a joke. It's some kind of sick joke. France got half its nuclear fleet is down because of it needs repairs, which means everybody within 100 miles of those places are being poisoned. An industrial city and the species and the farms, because all these places are surrounded by farms. On the windswept coast of Flamanville, an industrial city in northwest France facing the choppy waters of the English Channel, a soaring concrete dome houses one of the world's most powerful nuclear reactors. That's the scariest sentence you're ever going to hear. When this hulking death machine will begin supplying power to the France's victims is anyone's guess. Construction is a full decade behind schedule and 12 billion euros behind, or 13 billion over budget. So stupid. Because for $13 billion, you can build probably 20 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energies and storage. It's so stupid to have nuclear. The whole system, we need a military to arrest them and prosecute these assailants of our planet and species. Plans to start operation this year have been pushed back again to 2024, which has been saying that since 2006, right? Next year. Give us another $1 billion. And the problem at Flamanville are not unique. And Finland's newest nuclear power plant, which started genocide last month, was supposed to be complete in 2009. It's just, in one sense, it's laughable how pathetic this industry actually is. Sadly, it's not a victimless industry. It's 100% genocidal omnicide industry. U.S. nuclear power regulator seeks documents on NuScale's protection against quakes. So NuScale is the only so-called small modular reactors that actually have met some criteria, have been approved for the next level. It's just a paper concept. They've been at this for about 40 years, by the way. But NuScale is Fluor, which is from the Manhattan Project, that company. So they're deep insiders, basically. But it still doesn't mean nothing because they haven't been able to, despite the money constantly, they get everything they ask for. They get all the money they could ever spend. They get all the academics, the crazies, all the lunatic universities at their fingertips. They have the Department of Energy willing to cover up their crimes and genocides and omnicides. And they still can't get one up and working. It's because they're gutless and because they're the lower caste of humanity, really. The nuclear industry, they're the lower caste of humanity. They're the ugly stepbrother, so to speak, of humanity. After an engineer raised concerns about his ability to withstand earthquakes, they got a lot of engineers. They got around 800 hired, and they haven't got a single reactor. It's a scumbag industry. NuScale, the majority owner by construction, an engineering company which is Fluor Corp, which is part of the Manhattan Project, got approval for the design of a 50-megawatt small modular reactor. It's hoping. It's not hoping. That's not a word they use normally, right? It's the word, when you see the word hoping and nuclear, then you're talking about crimes against humanity every time. That carbon-free power project, remember for several years, every story would have that carbon-free power project. It's a very scary that they have access to the population for brainwashing the way they do. With multiple reactors at the Idaho National Laboratory, which is built on one of America's biggest aquifers, freshwater aquifers, that is no longer an aquifer, but try telling that to the victims, you know. It's a poisoned well now, safe of nuclear. And when you poison a well with nuclear, that's forever. That's not part-time. That's not going to dilute and a couple of years' time might be manageable. That's permanent. And you see that with all the laboratories across the United States. Certainly, that's got to be applicable for every other country. It can't just be one. Collapse of the reactor building could potentially cause early, I like that word, early, because it's going to happen eventually, and large releases of radioactive materials into the atmosphere and the ground, which could kill people. What about the species? They never ever mention them, never acknowledge them. They're not stewards, they're murderers. In an internal document, wait till I get back up to speed next week and start crushing these people again. I can't wait. Coming along really good. I'm being careful, but it's hard because I'm firing on all cylinders despite the fact that I'm recovering. I'm still firing on all cylinders. I still want to... Never mind. I don't need to explain myself to anybody who's hanging around for a while how I think. I think the way you're supposed to think, how every normal, healthy human is supposed to think. And we got to exterminate this bunch as soon as possible before they destroy everything. He alleged the design of the building intended to enclose the reactor unit in a spent fuel pool at their small modular reactors. There's a revelation, isn't it? Did not provide assurance could withstand the largest earthquakes considered without collapsing. Oh, and may be vulnerable to smaller earthquakes. Because the media is not going to come out and just stick it to the industry, right? So these connotations, when you start ticking the boxes of each of these connotations, all of a sudden you're this is a pretty scary picture. It's not imaginary, it's a real issue is what we're talking about. Collapse of the reactor building could potentially cause an early large releases. It was uncertain whether the additional action would affect the project's timeline, which has been delayed several times. Well, first off, this is 100% an experimental reactor, which means they got to come up with a design, they got to revise it over and over with the engineering teams, they got to start building it and then discover even more flaws than, right, even the reactors they build where they got multiple reactors working, they still end up with endless flaws, right? So imagine a new design. So by the time you build it, now you got to get the kinks, you got to run it, hope it doesn't blow up or melt down on you. If you make it past that for a couple of years, then you got to find all the flaws in it, and you got to incorporate that into a new design. Then you got to try to build that model. You're talking 20 to 30 years before you got a design that's replicatable, that you can replicate. And by then, of course, the renewable energy sector is going to pound and ground this industry into non-existence, and then let the war crimes and crimes against humanity pick up the ashes. The science advocacy group said the concerns Ma, which is a scientist, raised were troubling. NuScale's business case is based on its assertions it's a safer nuclear reactor. Now it's time to prove it by addressing the safety concerns, said scum degenerate monster Edwin Lyman, the director of nuclear power safety at the Union of Unconcerned Scientists. I hate his guts with a passion. I hate him more every day, too. He's a perpetual lawyer, eh? Japan's fake leader said nuclear power should be reconsidered as energy cost soars. Again, right? This is an absurd suggestion. When renewables clearly, demonstrably can do the job. But what they do is they'll locate money to the renewable energy. The big destructive industry will scoop it up, it'll waste it, and then they'll use that to say, see, it's a stupid industry, just go nuclear. Again, delaying the chances of anybody having a future. The reason we're in so much trouble is because of nuclear, because of the radioactive fallout has decimated the planet, decades of it has caused the global warming. Carbon, gas, and oil emissions don't cover the planet in visible plumes, pulsing energy every second at the speed of light for millions of years. Nuclear is the only thing that's ever done that and continues to do it. And all fuel pools are doing that to us worldwide. We are humanity's last stand, and we are in emergency mode. We should be in war mode. You know, we really should be, because there's no one willing to have, in the so-called public sphere, willing to have a conversation, let alone a debate. I'll never be invited to a debate. And they have endless ways that they can use during the debate to try to marginalize me. But the truth will shine, see? You can say all you want about Dana, but you can't say jack shit about my narrative. It's rock solid. And that at this stage, I do have the answers. I do have the ability to defeat their narrative hands down, because we go through it all the time. And what I show folks here on these presentations is just a fraction of a percent of what I'm going through each day and each week. It's really, it's really hard even for me sometimes, to understand the drive that I have, because you can only describe what I do as a driven person. Well, driven because of the destruction I've seen and the urgency of coming up with solutions. And the biggest threat, of course, is nuclear. Nuclear is being put on a pedestal as some savior when it's absurd. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's an abomination and a disease factory in every facet. It has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And that the people in the industry are the most vile and despicable and revolting, and that's incontestable. These are despicable cowards. It's a coward, and such is the name of this show, the Nuclear Scumbag Show. And this is born out of the ashes of misery that this industry has inflicted upon all species. There's no fun in what I'm doing. This is real. This is life and death, and this is not a game. This is 100%, unequivocally, is not. This is not a hobby. It is not a pastime. This is what we do is desperation, to inform the population, educate the population, so that no matter what happens, the truth legacy, the truth and ability to fight with the truth will be well ingrained into the population. Because, they took down my site last year with 1,600 presentations on it, while I was on a research expedition looking for spiders because they've been wiped out by the radiation fallout. But those 1,600 videos were mirrored on many different sites, not just YouTube. They're also on YouTube. But that was a desperate attempt, right? Because obviously some big players were using my site. Why else would you take down my site with no strikes, with no warnings? They just jacked my site. We must think about nuclear power giving rising electricity and gas prices, Japan's newest useful idiot prime minister said. Nuclear power's growing fan base in Japan faces the reality. Nuclear power's growing fan base. What was interesting about Japan, they closed down 54 reactors after Fukushima, nuclear meltdowns. And none of those hundreds of thousands of employees volunteered or went to work at Fukushima or the Fukushima Dani plant. Do you think that's an accident? Still, a lengthy restart inspection process combined with frequent lawsuits filed by the nuclear opponents. No, filed by morally driven good people, which is the industry lacks, has hampered efforts to get idle reactors back online. These are not idle reactors, these are idled disease factories. Nuclear renaissance hinges on solving the waste issue. Again, this is a Freudian argument. The nuclear renaissance is history. It doesn't exist. But in the next 4 years, from 2020 to 2026, there's a total of 5,500 nuclear power plants where the renewable energy is online. So it's absurd to suggest that there should be a renaissance. They do that in the context where there's no independent debate. There's no left, right, far right, extreme left, extreme right, which is in one sense probably good. But on the other sense, it's a one-sided, controlled argument. So it's not an argument, it's deception and deceit and dishonesty. And it's not by accident. An energy transition and geopolitical shift revived the nuclear debate. There is no nuclear debate. There's just nuclear lies, nuclear manipulation, nuclear deception, but there's not a nuclear debate. The nuclear industry can't survive a nuclear debate. That's literally the worst thing they can do. And they know it. That's why they don't do it. They can't survive a debate. And they don't have anybody in the industry with charisma whatsoever. On top of that, they don't have anybody in the industry, a shaker or mover, that can come out and hypnotize the population. They simply don't have it. And they can never have it, because you can't have charisma when everything's predicated upon deception and misrepresentation and deceit and dishonesty and murder and genocide and ecocide and omnicide, can you? You know what I mean, right? They can't have a debate because they can't win a debate. So they usually have controlled opposition like Greenpeace or something like that, or the Union of Unconcerned Scientists, etc., versus them, right? And they won't bring up relevant information. They'll just bring up the same perpetual lies they've been telling for 76 years. There's enormous backlog of radioactive residue. Again, you can see why, right? Because you can't have a conversation, because they're going to call radioactive waste from nuclear reactors radioactive residues. If you look up the definition of residues, it's actually not applicable to nuclear. Because nuclear is toxic on the atomic scale, where you can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. But each one of those atoms is capable of inflicting great harm on a single species. 2 million creatures can be destroyed with those 2 million atoms, despite the fact that on the head of a needle you can't see it. So as a residue, it has a lethal quality to it, where all other chemicals don't have those attributes. From nuclear reactors known as high-level waste. What the hell has high-level waste and residue got to do with each other? This is what I mean. The industry always has to argue in schizophrenia mode. Residue. There you go. I actually looked it up. Excuse me. A small amount of something that remains after the main part is gone or taken or used. Like the sorting of tea. So what the hell has tea and nuclear waste got to do with each other? But you see what I mean? The word, like, grammar is very important in deception. Residue, known as high-level waste. That's basically what they're doing. But they do it in a roundabout way. So the average person becomes disarmed, like, well, I got to go read something else. This is too messed up. I don't understand. There is an enormous, look up the word about enormous. See, enormous and residue don't go together in the same sentence. Do they? Residue. There is enormous amount of residue. It doesn't work. Feels good to have a few laughs, though. Last week it's actually traumatized me. I thought I was a goner. And so, believe it or not, you're looking at a new Dana. This ain't going to be the gentle one like the last time. This one is uppercuts and everything coming the nuclear industry's way. It's a smarter, wiser, harder, faster Dana is now emerging. High-level waste in need of safe and permanent disposal. And this presents a major challenge. Yeah, it's been around for like 76 years. And all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put it back together again. And it inhibits social acceptance of the energy source. Social acceptance. At a time when the industry is presenting itself as essential to addressing the climate crisis, which that started at 2015 at the Paris Accord. There was this consensus to brainwash the population with that particular narrative. As well as energy security in a changing geopolitical landscape. So they're talking about Russia, that Russia, right, is, we talked about this, actually done videos on it, one of Russia, Ukraine. And that's one of the first things we were able to identify was that, they're going to use Russia and Ukraine as a reset on energy, which means it's going to cause inflation, right? And at the same time, you watched all the COVID boxes at the top of all the major medias disappeared. Right, there was a reset happened, see? And I was able to identify it when it happened, and we've seen that now used constantly, just like we see climate change and net zero and carbon free since 2015 be the main narrative from the scum machine, the scumbag machine, and a changing geopolitical landscape. But in order, even if nuclear had these attributes, which it doesn't, you're looking at 15 to 30 years if everybody seized the moment right now and started the infrastructure before it starts to come into play. Now, this is a nuclear industry just being monsters and scumbags and degenerates and carrying out genocides and omnicide and ecocide. And the omnicide, of course, is the destruction of all species. So I use the word genocide a lot of the times because a lot of people don't even know what the word omnicide means if they're newbies, right? And so I always throw it out there because in my personal life, when I have conversations, I see that a lot where people don't know what the word omnicide, and another word that a lot of people can't seem to wrap their mind around when I'm talking to them in supermarkets because I'm a bit of a bastard. But a lot of people don't even know what the word emaciated means. That confuses the shit out of me. But, that's okay. If you're trying to learn, that's part of the equation. But when I talk to people in supermarkets and places like that, and they're like, well, what does emaciated mean? Well, they're starving it. Oh, okay. I'm not making fun of them or blaming them or anything like that. I'm just saying it's hard to have a conversation when the population lacks the basic skills. That's not an accident. I mean, here in Canada, they got rid of spelling bees in the 90s. Why the frick would you get rid of spelling bees in school, for goodness sakes, right? Like schools is these indoctrination centers. That's what they basically are. But there's a lot of brainwashing where you have to memorize certain things, right? But we no longer need to do that. We have cell phones. We can look up the information. We don't need to memorize jack shit anymore. It's all available at the drop of a hat to the children on top of that, see? And they know it. Yeah. They might go to the wrong sources for the answers, but you'll see the average kid, if they don't understand something, they got their phone there quicker than you can ever think about it. And if they got that stupid Siri or whatever the case may be, they'll ask the question. Unfortunately, they'll regurgitate whatever that creature says to them, which is a lot of the time the propaganda. The propaganda is very effective at utilizing technology and as a weapon. Finland, for example, was constructed in Okalo, the first of its kind deep geological disposal site. That's a big fancy word for a hole in the ground. Lack of progress in developing geological repository impedes nuclear energy is part of a zero carbon future, zero carbon. So, and because a lot of these are trigger words for me. When I hear zero carbon or net zero or climate change, I think of the people that wrote those papers originally And I'll just run you through it. But I'll also show the repercussion of some of that because that's always fun. And it takes a few minutes to get you up to speed. So here's the father of global warming. He wrote a paper and he coined the phrase global warming. United Nations says, great, let's take that and weaponize it against the population. Miles Allen coined the words net zero. He wrote a paper. And so United Nations seized up on that. And the United Nations is 195 militaries and weaponized it. And now used that to bludgeon society with. The carbon footprint was a campaign by BP Oil. The idea of a personal carbon footprint was popularized by a large advertising campaign from a fossil fuel company that had a major accident. And it was designed by Ogilvy. The campaign was intended to divert blame from the fossil fuel industry onto the people that were going to use the fuel. And now, of course, carbon is used to bludgeon every facet of your life, right? So how did you going to get the carbon footprint down? You guessed it. And how are we going to get you to buy into it with nothing but distractions? And then the last one, this disgusting creature, James Hansen. 1988, so 34 years ago, gave a single speech to Congress, which thousands of people a year do. And now that single speech for 34 years has been used as the only evidence, period, on the planet. And his version is that his testimony was pivotal. Important turning point in the history of the global climate change. And also started the climate tax. This was a single speech with no other evidence. Just somebody stood up in front of, well, I got climate change. And it's because of tin cans and pop bottles and cardboard from the idiots on our planet. Whereas BP Oil said, well, yeah, we had an oil spill. It's not our fault. It's the people that got cars and boats and everything. It's their fault. Otherwise, he wouldn't have got the oil. Right? So James Hansen done the exact same thing, see? And Miles Allen. But the United Nations seized upon all of them. And so then what happened, Dana? Well, hang on. Give me a second. I'm almost there. You're going to like this part. So then you have all the useful people that will come out and regurgitate that narrative as you're a scumbag. Barcode everybody at birth, says an author who, because she regurgitated that narrative now, her book sold, she made a lot of money, and she took it to the next step was, well, why should you be allowed to do anything? Let's barcode them. And when they hit their limit, climate change skepticism is a sickness, must be treated, says the professor. Skepticism. Well, there's skepticism about everything, but that's healthy. That's called having a debate, isn't it? Humans are a plague. No, he's a plague. Right? Attenborough is the plague. James Hansen is the plague. BP Oil is the plague. Miles Allen is the plague. She's a plague. Militant environmentalists. Militant. Which, no doubt that was controlled opposition. Calls for execution and decisive ecological warfare. No different than burning down, let's burn down climate alarmists. Calls for burning down skeptics' homes. And then you even to the stage of global warming deniers should be sentenced to death. These are professors and academics. Any resistance should be exterminated immediately. But that is based upon this creature the father of global warming, the father of net zero, BP oil, the father of the carbon footprint, and degenerate piece of shit known as James Hansen, who 34 years later, that same single conversation, single 15 minutes in front of Congress, for 34 years has been used to bludgeon society with nothing else new added to it. Through people like that creature there and this creature here, that monster right there, demons right there, and the list goes on and on and on. It's also known as social engineering, by the way. Lack of progress on developing a geological repository. Like, how hard is it to dig a friggin' hole into the ground? I'm confused. How hard is it to dig a hole in the ground and put the waste down there so it's still not splitting the atom into the environment? It's not hard. The reason they're not doing it is because they want the extermination of all the species, because this is a death cult. I don't know how anybody can deny that this is a death cult, by the way. I got no concept how anybody can deny. And because I'm able to 100% unequivocally articulate it with the documentation. If I can do it, surely the shit anybody can do it. I'm not that smart. So if I can do it, why can't anybody else? By contrast, the stalemate on creating such a disposal site in the United States, for now the world's largest producer of nuclear misery and agony and diseases, is hindering a further build-out of nuclear power. First off, that's simply not true. It's 100% posturing. How long did it take them to build Watts Bar again, reactor 2? 40 years or something? Everything else they put their finger on, they managed to destroy. It's a plague. The industry is a plague. The people in it are zombies. They're the definition of zombies. The lack of progress in developing and operating geological repository impedes the associated potential benefit. Again, there is no benefits to nuclear. It's absurd to suggest there is. It's the most carbon-intensive thing on the planet, period, bar nothing else. There's nothing else comes close to it. Gas, oil, and coal are nowhere combined, still are nowhere near as carbon-intensive as this industry actually is. The benefits, potential benefits of having nuclear energy as part of a zero carbon, I just walk you through all of that nonsense. The mitigation of climate change, and earlier we talked about how that's a ludicrous assertion. The U.S. Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board wrote to Congress in 2021. The U.S. Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board. Can you imagine what kind of rejects these people actually are? They push to expand nuclear. China. Some consider nuclear power essential. Yeah? Some. And you hear that framing all the time too, right? Some. Some people worship the devil. Does that mean that that's a better religion? Because some people do it. Some people are pedophiles. Should everybody now become pedophiles because some people are fucking pedophiles? It's not a very strong narrative at all. But you see him doing that exact framing constantly. Well, at least I do. And hopefully I show that all the time because I do. Firstly, nuclear power plants' emissions of greenhouse gas and other air pollutants are close to zero. This is ludicrous assertion. A batshit, twisted, sadistic assertion. It's patently false. Blatantly lies. But that's their whole existence is predicated upon that now, isn't it? And other air pollutants are close to zero. All nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation. period. The most lethal, toxic, destructive elements known to history, where nothing on the planet has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. It's a threat to everything with replicating cells. There's nothing else on the planet with those attributes, by the way. Right, so their entire narrative is based on proven and false assertions. Every facet of their narrative is based upon the same narrative that we've been fighting for a very long time, but it's the same narrative we're able to track back till 76 years ago. They got to keep the same narrative alive, because the minute that they break the cycle, then you got cracks in their narratives that are very exploitable, see? And so they're very careful to regurgitate the exact same narratives verbatim on top of that. Secondly, they provide baseload generation electricity that operates when intermittent renewable energy sources like solar and wind are unable to. Again, that's such a low, despicable attack upon renewables, because renewable has base loads. I'll demonstrate it for you. Here, hang on just 1 second. Not going to hurt you to wait a second. Hang on. I'm just messing with you. Here we go. So if you took wind and solar, backed it up with geothermal and tidal energy, which are 24 hours a day, sustained so-called baseload energies, and you back that up with these storage capacity. So there was 500,000 places worldwide identified for pumped hydro that are already natural. And all I got to do is pump water up a hill with excess energy. And many places do this for a base load energy, by the way, and release it back down. But you can use highly mineral water, heavy mineral water. So the heavy mineral water has a more energy production ability because it's heavy, right? And it's only you only need like 30 psi. But you can also use pumped compressed air wind storage. And so you dig big mine shafts, which I'm pretty sure we can figure out how to do that. And the excess energy from wind or solar or anything else is compressed down there. Now, they show they can harvest the heat left over for up to 2 to 3 weeks. They can hang on to it and liberate it back into the cycle when they want to release that energy, rather than originally what they were doing was they would compress the air. When it come time to release the air, they would use a little bit of gas or oil heat to expand the air quicker, right? But now they were able to show that they can store the heat, reclaim the heat that they originally were going to lose from the compression, because you generate a lot of heat. They're able to store that and then liberate it again when they want to unpack the heat, right? And now America's doing a 3,200 megawatt compressed air energy storage in the U.S. It's going to run for about 50 years. No toxic materials whatsoever. And use it for base load for about 50 years of 8 hours a day of base load energy for less than $1 billion. It'll have the same capacity as one of the biggest coal plants in the United States. But there was another way that came up, how you can store excess power underwater as a compressed system. Was a pretty neat idea too, right? But who knows how many's out there that we're even not aware of, because the industry has successfully hid that away from the population. Right? The nuclear industry is destroying everybody's future because it suppresses everything that is competitive. Finally, they support rather than compete with renewable energy sources. No, nuclear doesn't support renewable. Nuclear, right? Because you got to have totally different grids, totally different electricity spectrums, right? And that's the problem with a lot of renewables, is they don't fit into the grid because the grid is calibrated for the nuclear industry. and they refuse to upgrade it, locate the money, because nuclear industry wants to steal that money for their misdeeds. The International Atomic Energy Association, the IAEA, these are goblins. They're like, when you look at their entire leg, if you scrutinize the International Atomic Energy Agency, what you end up discovering is these are just goblins. If you go back year after year for their entire legacy, all the way back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because like the International Atomic Energy Agency is United Nations, the World Health Organization is United Nations, UNICEF, United Nations. The list is so long, I could probably go on for about 20 minutes of all their subsidy, so-called. They've taken over almost every facet of our planet and never fired a shot, so to speak. They're now a threat to so-called democracy. They're a threat to the existence of all species. There are 195 militaries. And the military is only good at one thing, is destroying everything. That's what they're good at. They have no redeeming qualities whatsoever. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the goblins and monsters, predicts that the nuclear generating capacity could double to 792 gigawatts by 2050, compared to the 393 gigawatts current in 2020. Again, last year, 2021, was 291 gigawatts of renewables came online, which is equal to 333 nuclear power plants in a 12-month period. The nuclear industry can't compete with that. But they're a genocide system. The releases from these places, the high-end scenario would require significant action in order to be realized. It's absurd to suggest that they could or would. Right? The industry, renewable industry, has already demonstrated clearly that it's going to replace them. It's going to dwarf them. It's going to literally... So this is the desperation industry, is what you're seeing. And it has an enormous amount of universities at its fingertips. The media, certainly all of the universities have betrayed. They're now just schools of mass destruction. And the medias have betrayed as they've been gobbled up by the industry and now weaponized against the population. And so the industry is well positioned to do that, but it's incapable. It's too dysfunctional. It doesn't have the charisma. Again, I use that word. It doesn't have the charisma which is necessary, which only comes with facts, which only comes with truth, which only comes with conviction, which is something the industry doesn't have. It doesn't have a single person in the entire industry that you can name that is likable, because it's not. Nobody good is able to exist in the industry. And that's the enormous amount of power to have in that industry. The industry won't take the chance that you... If you had somebody with, that charisma and that person turned against them, that would be the end of the nuclear quite swiftly, see? So because they understand that, they're incapable of surviving. But they have the drowning man syndrome, where they're going to take down all of us and all the species with them as they go down. And this is what we're looking at right now. How we doing? So we got a poll tonight. I don't know if you noticed. If we want to save the whales and all other species, should we ban all nuclear power plants? And we see some desperation where 7% said no. That's desperation. That's just desperation from the nuclear industry. When you see an overwhelming 93% says, yeah, you got to ban nuclear, you need to ask yourself, holy shit, are we in trouble, Dana? Because that's the right question to ask yourself. And the answer is obvious, I would hope. And terrifying on top of that, yeah? So, again, remind you that you go back and you read this story there. Improve policies and the Constipated Party 26 climate goals. And the Constipated Party's COPs 26, United Nations climate change, so-called, in United Kingdom last year, was 13 days, started on Halloween and ended on the 13th of November, right? And I done a show every single day. And it was revolting, by the way, because you had to listen to all this lies and deceptions and misrepresentation and deceit. And we challenged every one of their stories each day. It was really difficult shows to do, and I slept for 4 days straight after, I think it was, because that's how taxing that was to deal with all the deception. In 2021, driven by solar, almost 290 gigawatts of new renewable power will be commissioned in a 12-month period. And globally, renewable electricity capacity is forecast to increase between 2020 and 2026 at more than 4,800 gigawatts, which is 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewables. Why would you want nuclear if you can... just imagine, though, because technology doubles and everything, right? I can't remember. There's a law they call... it doesn't matter, but the technology doubles every 18 months or so, right? And the price gets cheaper every 18 months by half maybe or whatever. But there's a consistency we've been looking at for about 35 years of that. The hell is the name of that? Something law. We joke about that. I can't remember. But 4,800 gigawatts of renewables, which surpasses all current nuclear and fossil fuel worldwide. The equivalent to the current global power capacity of fossil fuels and nuclear combined. Nuclear renaissance hinges on solving the waste issue. Now, we covered that earlier, Dana. I thought so too. Sometimes I'm reading the stories twice and I start click, click, click. Usually I'll shift through this stuff before I go live. I didn't tonight. I was having problems with my system. And 30 minutes before we went live, I had to reboot everything. I'm going to have to do updates soon anyway on this whole system. I always dread doing it. I really do. It's hard to wrap your mind around how big of an operation I got. And so doing updates on this equipment is a disaster. It's just a disaster for me. I hate it with a passion. But each year you got to get it done, whether you like it or not, sometimes twice a year. It's expensive equipment. I don't like frigging with it, If it works, it works. But you got to also realize that that's not in the best interest of what we do here. The job's got to get done. The nuclear renaissance is an opportunity for Canada. Will we seize it? Heather, blah, 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 and the Ottawa Citizen. Again, you're seeing a lot of those narratives the last couple of months trying to push Canada, justify the push in Canada sometimes. Nuclear power is roaring back. These are patently false again. I mean, Canada lifted all restrictions on all prefectures in Japan 93 days after the nuclear meltdown started, and they might not stop for another 1,000 years. It's the absolute worst case scenario to do something like that. In Canada, the nuclear industry in Canada was showing its contempt for all humans in Canada, and it's particularly women and children when they done that. That was an act of contempt. That was genocide here in Canada. And it's a slow genocide, but now it's kicked into second and third gear, because you're talking about 1,800 illnesses before the cancer shows up. Cancer skyrocketed in the last 11 years, but Alzheimer's and dementia and autism and diabetes and Down syndrome and heart problems and liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline have eviscerated our entire country. And that had a lot of that has to do with lifting all restrictions, no restrictions whatsoever on food from multiple nuclear meltdowns. I think it's striking, the betrayal. It's impossible to imagine that they would do something like that, but they did something like that. And to articulate that, now the biggest prefectures, you're looking at almost half of Japan in volume. Yeah, Japan's got a lot of prefectures, but these are big prefectures. That's where all the food was banned, not just Fukushima Prefecture, for 55 other countries. So you can see how powerful the nuclear industry is in Canada, but you can see the genocide that the nuclear industry now perpetrated upon the Canadians by lifting all restrictions with no restrictions. 93 days after the meltdown started on top of that. It doesn't seem that people can be that evil. It really, no matter how many times I cover this, it's so hard to accept that there's that many evil people, and that they've done that to the entire country, and they have no issues with that. Bruce Power would rape and murder your children and feed it to their goldfish and wouldn't lose a wink of sleep over. The world's richest uranium deposits are found in Canada and Saskatchewan, which is the same spot now where they had 8 albino buffaloes in the last few years, by the way. The Saskatchewan's a lost province to the nuclear industry. Look at the farm fields. Every time they show you these nuclear power plants, it's stunning how often you'll see farm fields. And we had gathered up over 100 pictures of nuclear power plants, and I was looking for high up shots, and almost every single shot was the plant that's surrounded by farms. And that's just terrifying and humiliating, by the way, because that's genocide. That's on purpose. That's not an accident. That almost all nuclear power plants are built in the middle of farmland. Chernobyl in 1984 and Fukushima Daiichi in 2011 dealt near fatal blows to the nuclear industry. But our concurrent energy security climate crises are changing hearts and minds. And a nuclear renaissance is on the horizon. This is patent lies. 100% fabrication of the facts. The high cost and intermittency again of wind and solar, and the energy crisis provoked in the fall, which is Russia and Ukraine, helped push nuclear back to the forefront after years in the wilderness. So you can see how the industry took advantage of that. The world was worried because Russia took over Chernobyl. Russia went and took over a nuclear plant. The whole world was frightened to death. Nuclear industry panicked and then come out with all these song and dance stories claiming that nuclear was the great savior. The urgent need to get off Russia's natural gas. Yeah, but it takes about 15 to 20 years for the industry to have a capacity to put itself in that position. The quickest way would be renewables, right? And then backed up by geothermal and tidal energy for sustained baseload power and sustained power, and then backed up with compressed air and pumped hydro storage. You can get rid of coal, oil, gas, and nuclear once you do that. And that's ultimately what you're going to end up having to do, is what I'm telling you. And batteries are not part of that equation. Again, nuclear power could help Europe, but not for years and years and years and years, yeah? Nuclear renaissance in Canada, will we seize it? No, Heather, but you should be seized and put into a concentration camps with the rest of the pro-nuclear industry. Let me see here. Yeah, Moore's Law is what I was looking for. Retro obsolete optics. And anybody else that managed to guess it? Murphy's Law was the other one, James. Yeah, Lucy got it. There was two different ones, wasn't it, I was talking about? Moore's Law was the technology changes doubles every 18 months or so. And it's been doing that for almost 35 years. But Murphy's Law is where something goes wrong, it goes wrong in a bad way. That was the other one I was trying to. Why did I have why could I remember neither one of them? Why did I have a brain block? If I'm starting to slur words like that, it's probably time to call it a night. Feels good to smile. I took care of myself since Thursday. We raised $120 from James Lucid, and we raised $50 with Patrick B, and we raised $175 with Colette S. And so I had to take care of myself, so I loaded up on minerals, zincs, and calcium, potassium, magnesium, vitamins, of course. And I mean, I loaded up, and then good food to rebuild my immune system, and because I've been, I have such a big operation, got to keep everything functional, so everything I got and everything I raised has to go back into it. But when I got hurt last week, I realized I had to change. And I do feel, it's going to take a little while longer, I'm sure. But I certainly feel the difference from all this nutrition and vitamins and minerals being into me. It takes quite a while for that to actually manifest in you, right? So I'm only going to get better from here on out. Probably one of the best things that could have happened to me, really, in such a roundabout way. But I feel this invigoration now, too. I was feeling it yesterday. I'm still exhausted, but I just feel like a new Dana, and I noticed that I do feel that the industry, I can see a lot clearer how the industry is desperate now. Because if you get a lack of nutrition in your body, it means you're getting a lack of oxygen in your body too, right? Which means you're going to make you're not able to rationalize it like you should or could or would. And so all I can say is I'm really grateful that I feel better, and I only feel better because people help me, certainly, and that I have a much better outlook on things, and that I feel a more urgency, I think, because my mind is clearing up on me. And I'm really super happy that I am feeling better, because I was worried sick last week. I don't know if it's possible to articulate how scared I was, but I was not in good shape last week. That was a horrific experience, actually traumatizing experience. But I come to terms with it, because that's what you do, I guess, when you're in that scenario. And we got a lot of sunshine for the next week down there. Today we had sunshine, actual sunshine. I know that sounds weird to people, but we don't get sunshine here. And so the temperature is still westerly winds, so it's pretty cold. But it's sunshine. And sunshine is good for you, trust me. Certainly changed my mood a bit too. And it's going to be the same thing tomorrow and the next day. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to get out and get back to work yet. I got a lot of work to get done. But I feel that energy coming back to me. So I'm super thrilled about that. And I just want to take everybody in the nuclear industry and drop them in a wood chipper. I mean, I don't physically want to do it. I mean, that's what should happen to the nuclear industry. They don't have the same rights as toilet paper. They are scumbags. They are a plague. And we want to deal with the plague. They are a threat to our planet and to all the species and to the future generations. That's how you should describe the nuclear industry. Their entire legacy is predicated on deceptions and lies, and endless lies. And they're revolting, they're cowardly, and they're holding back our planet. Our planet can't progress with them on it and with them interfering with everything. There's nothing they won't do to try to get some high ground. They'll drown everybody as they go down. They're 100% the drowning man syndrome. And so, let me come in and say goodnight to everybody because I had a good day and a good night. I might as well end it on a good note. Because that is a good note when I say hi to the real people of this planet. Chet Austin. Hi, Chet. Bulging batteries. Peaceware. Port Angeles. James Lucid again. James, thank you, my friend. Warren, Kevin Blanche. Hi, Kevin. Patrick, thank you again, Patrick. Darlene. Just a quick shout out. Chelsea, MC. Hi, Chelsea. Hope you're doing good. Christian Boyce. Katja, Obsolete Optics, Tinker, Albert, Nick Moulton. Good night, everybody. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. I'm going slow and easy till I get back up to stomping speed. Dale P. We still got a ways to go, but we're on the right path now. Nuclear industry has to be held accountable. Barks and meows. James Lucer got it right. They need to suffer, not die. A man after my heart there. Nick Daniels. Yeah, I'm pretty angry at the nuclear industry, and for good reason. I'm not picking on the industry. They picked the fight. Richard McCann. Yeah, I'm feeling a little fatigued at this stage from sitting up in a chair like this, but that's okay. Don Vincent. So I picked a good time to end the show, that's for sure. This is not a job for me, right? This is necessary. This has to get done. Dana Nasana. I hear you. J.J. Gill. You're welcome. Hemp rocks. How long the poll gonna last? Just another few moments. I'll bring it up one more time before we shut it down. Yeah, I think we're there, are we? Steve White. Oh, Steve Young is out there somewhere. Yeah, Nick Daniels. Yeah, Patrick, deep breathing exercise is a good idea, actually. Let's bring up the poll here again for everybody. Yeah, bring up the poll. See, the nuclear industry was spamming us again. 64 votes, 92% got the right answer. If we want to save the whales and all other species, we should ban all nuclear power plants immediately. That's the right answer. 100%. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. We're going to end the poll here right now. So if you're watching this later, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to share. Don't bother subscribe and put me in the bookmarks so you can actually find me. YouTube, every Saturday or Sunday, YouTube will update my subscription by 2 or 3 or 4 people. Once a week, basically. And my other site, for 4 years, I had 24,200 subscribers. Never had 24,201 or 24,199 subscribers. I had 24,200 subscribers for over 4 years, exactly. Never went up, never went down. And so when I say put me in your bookmark, particularly if you're new, there's a reason for it, so you can find me that way. Because the industry, is sure as shit, is going to unsubscribe you down the road. You got to watch out for buying marijuana because the government here in Canada radiates all the legal marijuana with nuclear. All of it. So if you smoke the legal or eat the legal marijuana here in Canada, you're eating radioactive material. It's disgusting, isn't it? The nuclear industry is despicable. No matter how you look at it, the nuclear industry is incredibly despicable. Oh, okay. Looks good anyway. That was a good show tonight. Hope everybody had a good Sunday night. I know I'm not my normal smash and stomp and curse Dana, but I'll get there. I'll get back to normal. I'll get back to normal at some point. I didn't want to cut, I wanted to fade. Let's try that again here. Because I had cut on, right? And I'll show you what I mean by cut. So cut is where I can jump. I can just jump randomly from the camera, from different settings, right? You see that? That's what jump means. Jump's pretty cool. But I'm supposed to use that for each story, jump to another frame. You got to appreciate how much work it actually takes me just to get to this frame. So then, for my slow zoom, it's a 19-second full zoom. Let me get back here. So when I zoom out, it's supposed to be like that long, slow zoom, get a chance to wave, say goodnight to everybody, collect my thoughts. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We got a big show for tomorrow night. Yeah, I needed a couple of shakedown shows to get back into my mode. I feel good tonight. I never made it through most of the stories I had for tonight, but hey, that's normal. I don't think anybody can get through all the material I got each day, let alone me. See everybody tomorrow night. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see you soon.